They said he was sleeping. First, his phone was gone. Then his keys. Finally, his own children sat him down and told him they wanted power of attorney, control over his life. But Leonard wasn't losing memory. He was building proof. Page after page, folder after folder. And when the day came, he didn't sit quiet in court. He stood up first, and the line he spoke made sure no one could ever write him off again. Before I show you what Leonard said that stopped the courtroom cold, tell me where you're watching from and make sure you're subscribed. Because this story begins with doubt, but it doesn't end that way. They didn't start with a conversation, they started with control. Leonard Harris noticed it the way a carpenter notices a board out of true, by feel, not by sight. His phone wasn't on the counter where he'd left it charging, not on the hall table, not under the recliner cushion where it sometimes slid. The charger was unplugged, the cord coiled and tucked away like a tool someone had decided he shouldn't use anymore. He stepped onto the back porch and found Marcus on the steps, looking out at the yard like it belonged to him. Leonard's phone, Leonard's, sat open in Marcus's palm. "Careful thing," Marcus said, sliding the phone into his jacket with a gentle, practiced voice. "You've been forgetting calls lately, Dad. We're just making sure you're okay." Leonard didn't raise his voice. He just watched. 34 years in this house, and he could hear what a man meant by the weight of his words. This wasn't help. It was a quiet trial without a judge. That evening, his keys were gone from the hook by the door. That hook had held them for nearly 3 decades. It held nothing now. "Driving's getting risky," Marcus said when asked. "We think it's better this way." "We?" Leonard asked. "Tasha," Marcus replied, careful and solemn. "She saw you miss the turn last week?" "I missed the turn because of road work," Leonard said. Marcus nodded as though he hadn't heard. Then he walked away with a son's smile and a stranger's certainty. Leonard closed the door to his study and let the silence settle. He wasn't confused. He wasn't forgetful. He was taking notes. Mid-hook. "They thought I was sleeping, but I was already keeping score." The next day brought a phrase this family had never used in all their years of dinners and holidays. Family meeting. The living room looked staged for it. Chairs pulled close. A wooden box of tissues set on the coffee table like a prop. Marcus sat straight-backed with his hands folded. Tasha had one ankle tucked behind the other, her smile soft and sympathetic, polished as a church announcement. Their daughter Layla flicked her eyes from her phone to the adults and back, already embarrassed for the part she was supposed to play. "Dad," Marcus began, using the tone you use on a child before a shot. "We've been noticing some changes. Missed appointments, unanswered calls. You told the neighbor our anniversary was the 14th. You celebrated it on the 14th, Leonard said, flat. You told everyone it was the 14th. The actual date is the 12th, Marcus replied carefully. Details matter. We want to be sure things are in place. Tasha leaned forward, soft voice loaded with air. Leonard, we love you. If anything ever changes, it would help to have paperwork, someone authorized. It might be time to talk about power of attorney. There it was. No warm-up, no ramp. The verdict delivered as concern. Leonard kept his face still, the way he did when sighting down a level. They weren't checking on him. They were planning around him. He didn't argue. He didn't plead his memory like a schoolboy reciting. He nodded once. All right, he said. Marcus exhaled like a man who hears a lock click. Tasha's smile brightened a single watt. Layla looked down at her screen, relieved the scene was over. They believed the door had opened. Mid-hook. If they were measuring me by silence, they forgot I measure by paper. That night, Leonard went to the room in the house that had always been his study. The leather chair by the window creaked in the same place it had creaked for 10 years. He opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet and slid out a folder with a thick black label across the front. If they'd try. He hadn't made it out of paranoia. He'd made it the way a man keeps extra batteries and a spare fuse, not because he expects failure, but because he's seen how people act when the lights go out. Inside were 4 years of tax returns, pharmacy printouts with dates and pickup times, utility bills paid early, bank statements, appointment cards matched to calendar entries, his own handwritten logs of calls, including the days his phone was missing from his hands, copies of emails, screenshots of confirmations, the small things that prove the big thing a life handled. They didn't want proof, they wanted permission. He had proof anyway. He added a new item to the front of the stack. A neat page labeled recent with yesterday's date, and under it 3 lines. Phone removed from my possession, returned locked, and for safety. Keys taken from door hook. Driving's getting risky. Meeting called in my home. POA introduced as care. He slid the page protectors back, squared the corners with his palm, and locked the spine. On his desk, the old landline sat where it always had. He dialed a number he knew by heart. "Felicia?" he said when the voice answered. "It's Leonard Harris." "Mr. Harris," she said. "What's happened?" "I believe I'm about to have a competency decided for me. I'll bring you the paperwork." "Today?" she asked. "In 1 hour." He hung up, took a breath, and opened a small metal tin from the top drawer. Inside was a flash drive labeled "Back Fence." 2 days ago, time-stamped footage from his neighbor's security camera, showing Leonard bracing a post, drilling anchor points, lifting a panel into place. He added it to the folder, then slid in a printed list of prescriptions with refill dates and the upcoming appointment card for Dr. Bryant, already booked. Mid-hook. They brought assumptions. I brought timestamps. Guess which one holds up? Down the hall, he could hear Marcos and Tasha's voices in the kitchen. Quiet, confident, the way people sound when they think they've solved the problem by naming it. Leonard didn't listen for the words. He listened to the rhythm. It was the rhythm of people who believed the next step was theirs to take. He closed the folder and stood. The house looked the same as it had the day he carried his wife over this threshold. Same walls, same light across the hardwood, same hook by the door where his keys should be. He took the empty hook in his fingers for a second, then let it go. They wanted guardianship. They wanted the pen. He picked up his briefcase instead. As he passed the mirror in the hall, he didn't check his age. He checked his eyes. They were steady. He set the briefcase by the door, wrote a single note on a yellow square, and stuck it to the front of the folder. "I speak first." Then he turned off the study lamp, and the room fell to the kind of clean, workable darkness that a man can think in. Mid-hook. They were sure I'd fail a test. They never planned for me to give it to them. The envelope came without warning. Thick, cream-colored, embossed with the seal of the county clerk. Leonard didn't need to open it to know what was inside. He sat with it for a full minute at the dining room table. Steam from his coffee rising, the morning sun angling through the blinds. The house was quiet. Too quiet for something that loud. He peeled it open carefully, like the contents might bite. Inside was a formal notice. A petition had been filed to assign power of attorney, filed by Marcos and co-signed by Tasha. The wording was smooth, bureaucratic, but the meaning hit hard. It stated concern for emerging signs of cognitive decline. It claimed recent memory gaps and unreliable personal routines. It warned of dangerous behavior behind the wheel and said Leonard had become difficult to manage. Manage. That word lingered. This wasn't a conversation. It wasn't care. It was a quiet coup. Leonard set the letter down. He didn't touch his coffee again. Instead, he got up, walked down the hallway to his office, and opened the same drawer he'd opened the night before. The folder was still there, labeled clearly in bold permanent ink. "If they try me." He added the letter to the front of the stack. Then he picked up the phone and called Felicia. She was his attorney, the one who'd handled his living trust. Sharp, unshaken, the kind of person who didn't waste time with pity. Felicia, he said, I just received a petition. He didn't need to explain. She said, can you come in this afternoon? Give me 1 hour. Leonard hung up. Before he left, he gathered everything: his calendar log, receipts, bank statements, bills, a fresh printout of his online medical portal showing his most recent prescriptions, a list of appointments he had booked and kept, and one more thing: a small flash drive. Inside, video footage from his neighbor's security camera, time-stamped, showing Leonard helping repair a broken fence panel just 2 days earlier, drilling, lifting, balancing the frame. He tucked it all into a manila folder and walked out the door. No calls to Marcos. No notice to Tasha. Let them believe he was unaware. Let them believe they were ahead. Felicia met him with a handshake and silence. They sat across from each other in her corner office. No small talk. He placed the folder on her desk. She flipped it open and began scanning. Receipts, logs, statements, timestamps, dates, notes in blue ink. No gaps. When she reached the petition, she paused, then leaned back in her chair. They are building their case on assumptions, she said. They brought assumptions. I brought timestamps. Guess which one holds up? She nodded once. I'll file a formal response. We'll request a hearing. You'll get your chance to speak. Leonard didn't flinch. I want to take the stand first. Felicia raised an eyebrow. Most people wait. I'm not most people, Leonard said. He left her office with a signed response and a date circled on his calendar. 2 weeks. That evening, he didn't rest. He worked, pulled every paper that mattered from his files, organized it all by category: appointments, medical, financial, communication. Each sheet told a story. Each timestamp pushed back against the version of him they were trying to sell. He wasn't just documenting memory, he was proving competence. The next day, Leonard visited his pharmacy. He asked for a full printout of his prescription history for the past year. The clerk asked if he needed it for insurance. No, he said. Court. From there, he walked to the DMV, picked up a license renewal form. It wasn't due yet, but he wanted it on file. Back home, he scanned every page, created digital backups. Then he made 2 folders, one for the court, one for himself. He didn't sleep early that night, not because he was worried, because he was thorough. At midnight, he sat in his chair again, opened the original folder, flipped through the pages slowly, not looking for holes, looking for strength. Everything checked out, everything lined up. This wasn't about protecting what was his, it was about proving what never left. His awareness, his readiness, his mind. And when the day came, he wouldn't just show up. He would stand up first. Leonard didn't spend the next 2 weeks pacing the floor or wringing his hands. He spent them preparing. Every morning he woke early, made his coffee, checked the mail, logged the day's tasks in a notebook he'd kept for years. Nothing fancy, just one of those hardback black ones, filled with clean lines and neat handwriting. He moved deliberately, calmly, not like someone panicking, like someone planning. The house was quiet most days. Marcos hadn't come by. Tasha hadn't called. But Leonard knew better than to assume things had gone quiet. Quiet didn't mean nothing was happening. It just meant the part he couldn't see was happening somewhere else. That was fine, because his part was right here. He started with what mattered most: his mind. He called Dr. O'Brien's office and asked for a full cognitive evaluation. Not a quick screening, not a 5-minute checklist, a full panel. When Dr. Bryant stepped into the exam room and saw Leonard sitting there, fully dressed, folder in hand, he didn't ask why. He just said, "Let's begin." They started with memory recall, number sequences, word patterns, story retellings. Leonard passed each section without delay. Then came logic puzzles, reasoning tasks, timed activities, reaction tests, multitasking drills. After nearly 2 hours, Dr. Bryant closed his tablet and looked at Leonard over his glasses. Most people your age don't ask for this, he said. Leonard sat still. I'm not most people, he answered. Dr. Bryant smiled faintly. Well then, let me tell you something most people your age don't hear either. He turned the screen around and tapped. You didn't just pass. You cleared every benchmark, memory, judgment, attention, even the processing speed tests. Statistically, you're functioning at the level of someone 20 years younger. Leonard didn't flinch. He just asked the next question. Would you be willing to appear in court? If I'm called, Dr. Bryant said, I'll be there. They shook hands. Leonard took the printed reports, placed it carefully in the folder, and left without another word. At home, he added the results to his growing file. Then he updated his checklist. Appointments logged, finances up to date, medical verified, cognition tested, confirmed, documented. The folder was beginning to feel heavier, but Leonard liked that. Weight in this case was leverage. He added tabs to each section, color-coded, labels in capital letters. He wasn't building a defense, he was building a mirror, something they'd have to look into when they tried to paint him as something he wasn't. A few days before the hearing, Marcus called. Leonard let it ring twice before picking up. Hey, Dad, Marcus said casually. Just wanted to check in. I'm fine, Leonard replied. That's good, good. You need anything? No? A pause. We're still going ahead with the POA request, Marcus said. It's nothing personal, just a safety net. Leonard kept his tone level. Of course, he said. I understand. They said goodbye. No mention of court, no apology. That night, Leonard stayed up late in the study, not anxious, just focused. He laid out every piece of evidence across the desk, the receipts, the tests, the logs. He reviewed his timeline, matched every claim with a counterpoint. They said he forgot appointments. He had confirmations. They said he missed calls. He had logs and timestamps from when his phone was taken. They said he'd been sleeping. He had pages that said otherwise. The night before the hearing, he ironed his clothes, black slacks, button-down shirts, polished shoes. He didn't dress to impress anyone. He dressed because it mattered. He packed the folder in a slim black briefcase and placed it by the front door. Set an early alarm, though he knew he wouldn't need it. Sleep came easy because the truth didn't weigh him down. It steadied him. In the quiet dark of the house, Leonard lay still, eyes open, not restless, ready. Leonard arrived at the courthouse 15 minutes early. The building wasn't grand. No marble steps, no columns, just two plain stories of faded brick, a glass entrance, and a quiet sense of bureaucracy. The kind of place where decisions were made in silence, not drama. He walked through the sliding doors and into the cool air of government conditioning. The smell of old carpet, dry ink, and copper toner hit him right away. Security was quick. No metal detector today. Just a tired-looking guard who waved him through without asking more than a nod. Leonard carried nothing but a briefcase. Slim, black, locked. Inside the courtroom, it was half empty. A scattering of people on the benches, some waiting for their own hearings, others maybe just watching. The walls were a dull beige, the seal of the state above the judge's bench. Simple wooden tables for the attorneys. No spectacle. Marcus was already there. Tasha sat beside him, legs crossed, looking polished and rehearsed. Her arms folded just tight enough to say she felt justified. Marcus kept glancing at his phone, not texting, just looking. Maybe at the time, maybe at nothing. Their attorney stood nearby, mid-40s, clean shave, tailored suit. The kind of man who called his clients by their first names and reminded them to smile in front of a judge. Leonard didn't look at them, didn't nod, didn't flinch. He walked straight to his seat beside Felicia. She was already there, legal pad open, pages marked with blue tabs. You good? She asked without glancing up. Leonard sat down and opened his briefcase slowly. "I've been good," he said. "Now I'm just ready." The clerk called the case. "Petition to assign power of attorney for Mr. Leonard Harris." The judge entered. Robe, grey hair, glasses perched halfway down his nose. Not a man in a rush. Everyone stood, then sat. The judge looked between the two tables. "Well," he said, voice steady. "Who's speaking first?" Felicia opened her mouth to respond, but Leonard beat her to it. He stood. "Your Honor," he said, "if it pleases the court, I'd like to respond before anyone speaks on my behalf." The judge paused. "Very well. Proceed." Leonard walked forward, unhurried, no shuffle, no tremble. He moved like a man walking into his own office. At the podium, he placed a folder on the wood surface. 3 tabs, color-coded. He didn't open them right away. He started with his name, his birth date, his address. Then, in quiet, measured words, he laid out the timeline. He told the court when his phone had gone missing, when his keys had been taken, when a meeting had been held in his home, without warning, without agenda, under the pretense of care. He explained how his behavior had been taken out of context, how each action they presented as decline was actually designed. He didn't get emotional, he didn't raise his voice. He let the facts do the speaking. Then he opened the folder. Tab 1. Receipts, pharmacy pickups, grocery runs, hardware store visits, all dated, all consistent. Tab 2. Appointments, confirmations, check-ins, calendar entries matched to physical appointment cards. Tab 3. Financials, bills paid, checks logged, bank balances in order, even a donation receipt to a local shelter. At the end, he pulled one last document from the back, sealed in an envelope. "My cognitive evaluation," he said, "requested by me, not prompted by them, dated last week." He handed it to the judge. Felicia followed with the supporting exhibits, printouts, originals, copies for the court, and one flash drive, security footage from a neighbor's camera, Leonard balancing wood panels and drilling them into place. Not shaky, not slow, capable. The judge remained quiet, then asked one question. "Mr. Harris, what steps have you taken to confirm these records are accurate?" Leonard answered without pause. "I have backups, physical and digital. I logged every date myself. Nothing here was handed to me. I've maintained my life, my bills, and my mind. What you're looking at isn't a defense, it's a record." He stepped back, sat down. For a few long seconds, the room held still. Then Marcus's attorney stood. He took a deep breath, smoothed his tie, and walked forward. "Your Honor, the family's concern is not unfounded," he began. "We are not claiming Mr. Harris is incompetent, only that there have been patterns. He once called his son by the wrong name. He has occasionally confused dates. There was a late payment on the water bill." Felicia flipped open a page, slid it forward. "Payment cleared 3 days early, documented and verified." The attorney continued. "He failed to return a call from his daughter-in-law on her birthday." Felicia slid another page. Mailed card, time-stamped, call logs show the phone was in his son's possession. The attorney's voice tightened. "This isn't about discrediting Mr. Harris. It's about ensuring he has the proper support before something happens." And that's when it happened. From the back row, someone stood up. Not rushed, not dramatic, just good. Heads turned. The judge looked up. "Sir?" The man stepped forward. "Dr. Reuben Bryant," he said, "primary physician for Mr. Harris." "Do you have something to add?" Dr. Bryant nodded. "I conducted a full diagnostic evaluation at Mr. Harris's request. Results confirmed intact cognitive function across all categories: memory, logic, reasoning, reflex, language. He scored in the 96th percentile, higher than many of my patients half his age." The judge leaned forward. "In your professional opinion, Dr. Bryant didn't blink. That man sees clearer than the people trying to blur his life. A wave moved through the room, whispered reactions, quiet disbelief. Tasha looked down at her lap. Marcus clenched his jaw. Felicia didn't speak. She didn't have to. The silence said enough. The courtroom hadn't officially reached the verdict, but everyone in that room knew what had just collapsed. The courtroom stayed quiet for a full 30 seconds after Dr. Bryant sat back down. Not a word, not a shift in the benches, just the thick silence of people realizing they had just witnessed a turning point. The judge didn't look up right away. He remained focused on the sealed packets of cognitive test results, flipping through the supporting exhibits Felicia had submitted. Every page painted the same picture: consistency, accuracy, presence of mind. Nothing erratic, nothing out of step. Then he looked toward the petitioners. Marcus had stiffened in his seat. The certainty that had carried him into the courthouse had drained out of his posture. His shoulders were tight, his lips pressed thin. He looked younger now, but not in a good way, more exposed and prepared. Tasha kept her head down, one leg crossed tightly over the other, her heel bouncing with quiet, nervous energy. Whatever calm she brought into the courtroom was cracking now. The attorney cleared his throat and rose again, adjusting the buttons on his suit jacket. Your Honor, he began, while we acknowledge the professional opinion of Dr. Bryant, we still believe Mr. Harris would benefit from some level of structured support, financially at the very least. The judge didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at him, then spoke with a quiet sharpness. Do you have any medical documentation of your own? Any written evaluations, test results, diagnosis from a licensed professional? The attorney hesitated. No, Your Honor. Only first-hand observations from the family. The judge leaned back in his chair. Which family members? The petitioners, Mr. Harris's son and daughter-in-law. Not exactly neutral parties, are they? There were a few soft laughs from the back of the room. The judge didn't smile. He wasn't joking. He turned directly to Marcus. Do you still believe your father is incapable of managing his own affairs? Marcus opened his mouth, closed it again, looked at his attorney, then tried. I thought we were protecting him, that's all. From what? Marcus blinked. We thought he was sleeping. He missed some things, appointments. He told the neighbors our anniversary was the wrong day. Leonard didn't move. He had already explained that, clearly, factually. And the evidence backed him. The judge pressed again. You removed his access to his own car, took away his phone, initiated a legal petition without seeking any clinical evaluation beforehand. That correct? Marcos swallowed. Yes. You filed that petition alleging cognitive decline, yet you didn't contact his doctor. You didn't consult a specialist. You didn't even give him the chance to respond before serving legal papers. Would you call that responsible? I didn't mean... The judge cut him off. You didn't mean to get caught. That landed hard. Even the court clerk paused in her typing. Tasha flinched. Her fingers tightened around her purse. Felicia sat still. She hadn't needed to say a single word since the doctor had stood. The judge returned his gaze to Leonard. You've lived in the same house for how long? 34 years, Leonard answered. You pay your own bills? Yes. Drive safely? Yes. You file your own taxes? Yes. Have you ever missed a court date before today? No, sir. The judge nodded slowly. Do you currently take any medication for cognitive issues? Any psychiatric treatment? Any history of impairment? No. And you sought out a professional medical evaluation of your own accord? I did. The judge looked back at Marcus. What you filed wasn't a petition based on concern. It was a strategy based on control, and now it's exposed. He turned to the clerk. Petition denied. Marcus's lips parted. That's it. The judge signed the order in one smooth motion. No, Mr. Harris, that's not it. He slid the file aside. This court sees a man who showed up with proof, not emotion, who didn't come in defensive, who didn't lash out. He brought the truth with him and waited for the rest of you to catch up to it. He looked back toward Marcus one last time. What I see here is a son who didn't have the courage to speak to his father, but had the audacity to speak for him, and a family that mistook quiet for weak. Silence followed, heavy, final. Felicia leaned over to Leonard and whispered, "We're done here." Leonard didn't smile. He simply reached for his folder, closed the flap, and stood. As they turned to leave, the judge called out once more. "Mr. Harris?" Leonard stopped. The judge nodded toward him. "I hope when I'm your age, I walk into a courtroom with half as much clarity." Leonard gave a slow nod. No pride, just acknowledgement. He turned, walked out without a glance behind him. And the sound of that quiet walk out of the courtroom said more than any gavel ever could. The courtroom doors closed behind Leonard with a soft, final click. No slamming, no dramatics, just the steady sound of a man exiting a room on his own terms. He didn't pause in the hallway, didn't look back. He moved with quiet purpose, every step measured, every motion controlled. His briefcase hung at his side, the weight of its contents no longer a burden, just evidence. Felicia caught up to him near the stairwell. "You know," she said, "you didn't just win that case. You undressed it." Leonard didn't smile, but his eyes said everything. "I wasn't going there to lose," he replied. Back inside, the room hadn't moved. Marcus still sat on the wooden bench, hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees. The adrenaline that had brought him to court that morning had long since drained. In its place was the dry, bitter taste of a plan collapsed. Tasha stared down at her lap, not crying, not speaking, just staring. She clutched her purse like a shield, fingers wrapped tight around the straps. The attorney was still beside them, but his posture had changed. Gone was the polish, the confident pacing. Now he leaned forward, speaking softly, no longer trying to win, only trying to explain. "The petition's been denied," he whispered. "There's nothing more we can do unless you have verifiable medical documentation, which you don't." Marcus didn't answer, because what was there to say? They had entered the courtroom confident. They had come armed with family statements, a crafted narrative, and the assumption that an aging man couldn't possibly stand up to the machine they were trying to build around him. But Leonard hadn't pushed back with anger. He hadn't snapped. He hadn't accused. He had simply told the truth and backed it with pages and pages of facts. And then, with one unexpected witness, the floor beneath their claims crumbled. Dr. Bryant's words echoed in the silence. "That man is sharper than the ones trying to gaslight him." Tasha finally whispered something. "We didn't mean harm." Marcus shook his head slowly. "But we did it anyway." They left the courtroom 10 minutes later, heads down. No eye contact with the clerk. No final words for the judge. Out in the parking lot, the sun had crept higher. It was the kind of brightness that didn't feel warm, just exposed. Leonard was already gone. His car, pulled from a quiet spot near the back, had slipped out of the lot while they were still processing the loss inside. Felicia had asked if he wanted her to draft a formal response, an official follow-up, a letter to reinforce the court's decision. "I don't need to answer noise. Silence is my verdict." At a red light 3 blocks away, Leonard sat with the window down, the wind brushing against his collar. For a moment, he didn't think about the courtroom or the judge or even his son. He thought about the last 2 weeks. The way they had moved around him, not with care but with calculation. The way his silence had been misread as surrender. and the way people assume you're sleeping just because you stop explaining yourself. He turned onto his street, the engine humming smoothly. Back at the courthouse, Marcus leaned against the passenger side of his car, watching traffic crawl past. Tasha sat inside, staring out the windshield like she was waiting for someone to rewrite what had just happened. His attorney shook Marcus's hand and said something about reconsidering in the future, but his voice lacked conviction, because even he knew it was over. In the days that followed, there would be no apology from Marcus, no message from Tasha, and Leonard wouldn't ask for one. He didn't need closure from people who tried to trap him. He had walked into a courtroom they thought they controlled and dismantled their version of him piece by piece. Back home, Leonard parked in his driveway and sat for a moment. No music, no engine running, just stillness. The same stillness he had been accused of sitting in too often. The same stillness they had mistaken for confusion. But stillness had never meant weakness. Stillness had meant patience. And now, the storm they thought they were prepared to unleash had come and left them standing in its wreckage, soaked with the truth they thought he didn't have the strength to deliver. Leonard opened his door, stepped out into the daylight, and headed inside. He had things to do, not out of spite, but because his life was still his and always had been. Leonard didn't wait. He didn't pause in the hallway. He didn't glance back at the courtroom doors. He walked straight ahead, each step steady, carrying the same briefcase he brought in. Lighter now, not because it held fewer documents, but because the burden they once represented had been lifted. Outside, the air was warmer than when he arrived. The courthouse lot was beginning to fill with others arriving for different cases, different fights. But for Leonard Harris, the hardest one was already done. He took a slow breath and stepped into the sunlight. No fanfare, no cameras, no one rushing to pat him on the back, just the quiet satisfaction of a man who had said exactly what needed saying, and nothing more. From behind, a voice called out, "Leonard!" He turned. Dr. Bryant approached, hands in his pockets, his face calm but proud. "You didn't need me to speak," he said. "But I'm glad I did." Leonard nodded. "They didn't think I'd be ready." Bryant smiled. "No, they didn't. People rarely expect preparedness when they think they are dealing with decline." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "They forgot I'm the kind of man who keeps every oil change receipt since 1994. Bryant laughed once. Short, real. "They'll remember now." They shook hands. No lingering. Just mutual respect between two men who understood each other without needing to say much. Then Bryant turned and walked to his car. Leonard stood there for a moment, watching the world go on around him. Cars passing, doors opening, another courtroom hearing beginning down the hall. But for him, there was nothing more to hear. Back home, the house was quiet. The same quiet it had always been. But now it carried a different weight. Not the silence of being ignored or doubted, but the silence of peace, of earned solitude. He walked straight to his study, didn't take off his shoes, didn't loosen his collar. He went directly to the filing cabinet and unlocked it. The folder was there, same as it had been the night they first sat him down and tried to decide who he was. He opened it. Not with hesitation, not even with care, with precision. He took every document out: tax forms, receipts, calendar pages, appointment cards, prescriptions, court exhibits, and spread them across the desk. Then he reached for a new binder. He began organizing everything into it. Each page slipped into a sleeve, each section labeled with bold tabs: medical, legal, financial, personal. He scanned new copies, printed backups, even added the court ruling and the cognitive evaluation results with a duplicate sealed in an envelope, marked clearly for safekeeping. This wasn't paranoia, it was legacy. Leonard didn't just want to protect himself from being questioned. He wanted to make sure that when the time did come, if it came, there would be no room for guesswork, no room for schemes. He updated his trust. Executor changed. Emergency contacts reviewed. Phone access locked down to only those he named. He wrote out instructions, Short, direct, notarized, clarifying what would happen if someone ever attempted this again. And then, finally, he reached for a blank white label, took his pen, wrote 2 words: cognitive receipts. He placed the label on the spine of the new binder, slid it into the drawer, closed it, locked it. And this time, he didn't sit back down at the desk. He left the room. Down the hall, the clock chimed once. Just past noon, he brewed coffee. But not because he needed it, because he wanted it. Because it was his kitchen, his counter, his choice. After lunch, he stepped outside into the backyard, the same place where he used to teach Marcos how to rake leaves, where he'd sat with his wife on Sunday mornings, reading the paper, where he'd built the small shed by hand, even when neighbors said it would be easier to hire someone. He stood near the fence and looked at the spot where he'd helped his neighbor replace a panel the week before. His neighbor waved from the porch. "You win!" the man called. Leonard gave a small nod. The neighbor grinned. Didn't doubt it. They talked for a minute, nothing long. Then the neighbor said something Leonard would remember for a long time. "You showed a lot of restraint in there." Leonard didn't blink. "That wasn't restraint," he said. "That was strategy." The man chuckled and headed inside. Leonard turned back to the house, stepped inside, closed the door behind him. And just like that, it was over. No confetti, no parade, just a man who refused to be rewritten. The next morning, Leonard woke up before the sun. No alarm, no noise, just the kind of wakefulness that comes from knowing the hardest part is behind you and the rest of the day belongs entirely to you. He sat up, stretched, and placed his feet on the floor with the same deliberate calm that had carried him through the courthouse the day before. His body ached in the usual places, but there was nothing unfamiliar about it. It was the ache of living. Not age, not decline, just wear. He moved through his morning routine like clockwork. Water boiling, coffee steeping, mug placed on the same coaster it had sat on for years. Outside the window, the backyard glowed with early lights. Fence lined clean. Grass even. The spots where he and his neighbor had repaired the panel was holding strong. He watched it for a while, not thinking about anything, just observing. There was no need to replay the chords, no need to analyze what had been said. The truth didn't need rehearsal. It had already spoken. By 8:30, he received a text. "Need help with the last section of the fence. You round?" Gary Leonard replied with one word. "Always." He put on his boots, grabbed his gloves, and stepped out the door. The air was sharp and fresh, the kind that clears the mind. A thin breeze carried the smell of cut wood and dry soil. Gary stood by the fence post, already holding a new panel. Leonard approached with his drill in one hand and a level in the other. They worked without talking for the first 20 minutes. Each man focused on the task. When one handed it over a nail, the other took it without a word. Just the quiet understanding of men who respected the work more than the words. Eventually, Gary broke the silence. "You okay?" Leonard adjusted the post slightly, checked the alignment, then looked up. "Better than okay?" Gary didn't ask for more. He nodded once and went back to hammering. When they finished, Gary wiped sweat from his brow and offered a beer from the cooler nearby. Leonard glanced at his watch. "Too early," Gary laughed. "Still got that sense of order." "Huh?" "Order isn't something you lose. It's something you prove." They stood there for a moment, just looking at the work they'd done. Then Leonard packed up his tools and headed back across the yard. At home, he entered his study and opened the filing cabinet. The new binder was there, right where he left it. Cognitive receipts. He opened it, flipped through a few pages. Nothing out of place. Everything labeled, indexed, verified. He reached for a sticky note, wrote the date, pressed it to the inside cover. That binder didn't just hold proof of competence. It held the structure of a man who had refused to be unraveled. Then, on a whim, Leonard picked up his car keys and drove to the DMV. No notice, no reason. He walked in, took a number, and waited quietly as the queue ticked forward. When his number was called, he stepped to the counter, and the woman behind the desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to renew my license." She glanced at the expiration. "You're early by almost a year." Leonard smiled. "I know." He passed the vision test without squinting, paid the fee, signed the form with a firm hand. "Anything else?" the clerk asked. "No, that's all for today." He walked out with the receipt in his pocket and his name still fully his. On the way home, he stopped at a rib shack on the corner. His usual order: half slab, extra sauce, coleslaw, cornbread. He sat at the window seat, the one where he used to take his wife years ago. He didn't rush the meal, didn't check his watch, didn't answer his phone. He ate slowly, not out of defiance, but because he could. Every bite reminded him of something they had tried to take from him. Not just freedom, but rhythm, the pace of his own life. And now it was his again. He took the long way home, not because he was lost, because he felt like it. The sky was high and blue, no clouds, the kind of day that doesn't ask anything from you, just lets you be. Back at the house, Leonard parked in the shade, walked up the front steps, and let himself in. He set the rib box down on the counter and opened the fridge. Cold tea, still there, still sweet, still exactly the way he liked it. He poured a glass, took a sip, then walked to the back door and looked out again. The fence, the grass, the lights, cutting across the patio. He had nothing scheduled for the afternoon, and that was just fine. Because sometimes victory doesn't look like a trophy. It looks like keeping the keys to your own house, your own car, your own name. That evening, Leonard sat at his desk with the lights dimmed low. No music played, no TV in the background, just the soft tick of the wall clock and the sound of dusk settling over the house. The air outside had turned cool, drifting in through the barely cracked window, the kind of breeze that reminded him of autumn Sundays, raking leaves, slow dinners, the smell of earth before rain. He reached over and opened the drawer where his binder now lived. Cognitive receipts. He slid it out and set it on the desk with both hands. Not with reverence, with recognition. Every tab inside told a story that didn't ask for permission to exist, a story that had stood up in a courtroom quietly and dismantled the lie that had been built around him. He flipped through the sections again. Financials, accurate. Medical, verified. Appointments, confirmed. Correspondence, archived. Legal filings, stamped, sealed, resolved. Everything was in place. Everything still is. At the very back, behind the last divider, there was an empty plastic sleeve. He reached for a fresh sheet of paper and placed it on the desk. No typing, just ink. He picked up his pen and wrote slowly, deliberately, his hand steady across the lines. Memory isn't fame. It's proof they prayed I wouldn't keep. He paused, reread it once, then slipped the page into the final sleeve, behind the doctor's letter, behind the court order, not in front, behind. Because it wasn't meant to prove anything to the world. It was a note to himself, to his future self, in case the day ever came when someone else tried again, in case his mind ever did begin to fade. He wanted to be able to turn that last page, read those words, and know. He had seen it coming once and prepared for it. He closed the binder, took a second, identical copy he'd made earlier, and walked over to the fire-safe box, tucked behind the coats in the hall closet. He placed the binder inside, then picked up a sticky note from the shelf. Wrote 6 words, only open if I forget my name. He pressed the note to the front cover, then locked the safe, turned the key twice, and stood still for a moment in the dark hallway. There were no footsteps behind him, no voices questioning him, no one peering over his shoulder. He was alone, and entirely intact. In the kitchen, the last of the tea still sat in the fridge. He poured a glass, sat in his chair by the back window, watched as the lights from the neighbor's yard flicked on one by one. He thought of Marcus, of Tasha, of the quiet that had followed the hearing. He didn't feel bitterness. He didn't feel triumph. He felt certainty. They had tried to write his ending for him, but Leonard Harris had never been a man who let others hold the pen. And even if one day the lines began to blur, even if time took pieces of him away, there would still be structure left behind. Evidence, instructions, identity. That's what the folder was for. Not paranoia, not pride. Clarity. He stood up from the chair, walked back to his study, and shut the lights. No music, no words, just one final act. He placed a small label on the back of the binder's spine. Not for others, for himself. Reinstated. That word meant more than any courtroom decision. It meant returned, restored, and remembered. What would you do if someone tried to take control of your life by pretending you couldn't control it yourself? Would you fight? Would you argue? Or would you do what Leonard did? Build a wall of proof so solid no one could knock it over. Some people think silence means surrender. But in Leonard's case, silence was structure. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about winning. It was about remembering who you are, loudly enough that no one else gets to forget it for you. Now, we want to hear from you. Has someone ever tried to speak for you when they had no right to? Have you ever been underestimated and had to prove piece by piece that you still had it all? Drop your story in the comments. And if this one hits close to home, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss tomorrow's story. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that proof beats opinion, share this video with them. You've been watching They Took My Keys and said I was losing memory, but I took the stand first. Watch another one on screen now, and we'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place, same truth.